Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? All right. Well, listen, it's my joy and pleasure to welcome you all to this biennial gathering that bears the name and spirit of one of the seminary's most distinguished teachers and towering theologians, Dr. Sang Lee. The Sang-Hung Lee Lecture was established to honor him, a scholar who not only shaped the minds of multiple generations that passed through this campus, but he also helped form theological movements. As the Hyun Professor of Systematic Theology and the founding director of the Asian American program, Dr. Lee made this campus a site of theological imagination and cultural belonging. His work helped birth Asian American theology here at Princeton Seminary as a vital expression of faith that speaks to the particularity of experience and also the universality of God's grace. And through this lecture, we here at Princeton Seminary seek to create and preserve space for Asian American voices of the present, for the empowerment of ministers and theologians of the future, and for the remembrance of this pioneer whose witness continues to ripple through classrooms, through pulpits, and theological movement that's now covering the globe. In honoring Dr. Lee's legacy, we also recommit ourselves to the vision that he embodied, that theology, when lived faithfully, must be as rigorous as it is compassionate, as intellectually bold as it is pastorally grounded. Now, this evening, we are so fortunate to have with us a scholar who stands firmly in this lineage of intellectual depth and prophetic courage, Dr. Kwok Pui-lan. Dr. Kwok has spent her career expanding the theological canon to make room for voices that have long been ignored or silenced. A theologian, a feminist theologian, a post-colonial thinker, a teacher of uncommon insight. She has devoted her life to articulating a theology that is global in scope and grounded in lived experience. She's most recently served as the Dean's Professor of Systematic Theology at Candler School of Theology at Emory University, where her teaching and her leadership continues to inspire and encourage theological imaginations of the next generation and left an indelible impression on the Candler community. Prior to that, Dr. Kwok was the William F. Cole Professor of Christian Theology and Spirituality at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she taught for a quarter of a century and became a mentor to generations of theologians, ministers, and activists coming out of the Cambridge campus. She has authored or edited more than 20 books in English and Chinese, including The Anglican Tradition from a Post-Colonial Perspective, Post-Colonial Imagination and Feminist Theology, Occupy Religion, and the Hong Kong Protests and Political Theology. Her scholarship is both theoretical and practical, academic and accessible, a rare combination that has earned her international acclaim and the respect of theologians worldwide. Now, among her many leadership positions within the Theological Academy, Dr. Kwok has most notably served as the president of the American Academy of Religion, the premier professional association of our guild. But beyond titles and publications, Dr. Kwok is a builder of bridges. Her theology draws from a deep wisdom of the margins that speaks into the center. She invites us to see the world anew through post-colonial eyes and feminist faith, to imagine God's work of liberation not as an abstract idea, but as a lived and communal practice of love and, I would even say, tenderness. So my friends and colleagues, please join me in welcoming to this lectern our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Kwok Pui-lan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you to President Wharton for this invitation and for this generous introduction. It is a great honor to deliver this year's Professor Sung Kwon Lee's lecture. He was an esteemed teacher, researcher, theologian, mentor, and colleague. From him, we learned about Jonathan Edwards. We learned about Asian American theology. We learned how to be a prophetic voice in our church and communities. It is with humility and great memory that I deliver this year's lecture on the challenges of doing Trans-Pacific theology. Many of us know tomorrow is a very important day. Finally, President Trump is going to meet with President Xi, not in China, not in the United States, but in South Korea. They are the leaders of the two biggest economies in the world. We hope there will be a truce for the trade war, because this is going to affect global economy, livelihood of many. I am talking about the farmers in Iowa. I am talking about the factory workers in Guangzhou. So let us pray the outcome will be successful. As a theologian, I ask myself, and I also invite you, to think about what theologians, ethicists, practical theologians have to say to a moment like this. Whether the theological educational training that we provide for students will be sufficient to address a changing world order. And that is why the challenge of doing Trans-Pacific theology. Today, my lecture will be divided into these several parts. I'm going to share with you the development of Asian American theology. What are its major themes? Leading to the discussion about Trans-Pacific theology. How did that come about? And how did I corral my colleagues to contribute to this anthology, Trans-Pacific Political Theology? What are some of the initial explorations, categories in this evolving Trans-Pacific theology before laying the ground to talk about the challenges for us today? Many of us, of course, know the rise of Asian American theology came from a particular context. Of course, some of the Asian and Asian Americans participated in the civil rights movement. And you recall the era in the 60s and 70s, the anti-Vietnam War movement. So Asian American theology was very rooted in social movements. Not only that, the students then demanded, why aren't we learning Asian American history and culture? And that is why there was this push for the establishment of Asian American studies. First, at San Francisco State University. And it became a field of study. And it also contributed to the development of Asian American theology. Of course, the Asian American began to organize themselves. In the mainline denomination, we have caucuses. We have caucuses in the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church, and we also have the so-called ethnic churches, right? That's Asian Americans form their independent churches. So out of social movements, Asian American studies, and the caucuses and the Asian American churches came Asian American theology. I am glad to let you know, I have been waiting to get my hands to touch this book for a long time. This is the first book on Asian American theology, edited by Royal Sano, 1976. And this book is not just focusing on one Asian ethnic group. You have Koreans, you have Filipinos, and you also have people from different Asian ethnicities contributing, both men and women as well. So this is one of the earlier anthology. And one of the major inquiries was, how can we conceptualize or understand Asian American identity? Here we have Professor Jung-Young Lee, who spoke marginality. I am sure some of you have read and you might be familiar with. Using marginality as a lens to talk about Asian American experience and then reflect on how do we understand God, how do we understand Christ. And then, of course, you have Fumitaka Masuoka. In Out of Silence, that book, he wrote about holy insecurity. Asian or Asian Americans are always in between, sandwiched in between. There is always this question, who am I? I am not black, I am not white, I am not brown, I am not indigenous. So out of that holy insecurity, we try to think about our own identity, our own history, our community, leading us to think about the ministry of the church and the vocation of theology anew. And obviously, we need to mention one of the leading Asian American theologians. This is my good friend, Dr. Rita Nagashima-Brock. She offers interstitial integrity. She was born in Japan. Her mother, Japanese. Her birth father, Puerto Rican. She was adopted by a white father who was in the military, so she traveled a lot. For her, in between, marginality did not capture the complexity of her experiences. That is why she used this term, interstitial integrity. And she said, interstitial integrity is this spirit in us. Our struggles to hold the many in the one. We endeavor to make sense and meaning out of the multiple social locations, the hybrid experiences, and the many powers of death and life that are placed before us. And of course, we remember Dr. Sung-Kwon Lee, who published this book on Asian American theology and using the concept liminarity. And through this lens of liminarity, he then goes on to talk about the understanding of the liminal space and how we can look at God anew in such a space. So Asian American identity, who am I? Who are we? Where are we going? Has been a recurrent theme in Asian American theology. The second major theme is to recover our own culture and using our own categories to talk about God. So I just cite from a few cultures. Many of us are very familiar with the Korean categories of Han and Jong. And then from the Hindu tradition, we have Sati, which is the feminine creative principle. Mona is from the Pacific, meaning the sea. And we have Pui-lan from the Malaysian and Filipino background. This is the women ritualist, the healer in those communities. Very important for women's practical theology to recapture the heritage and what those leaders have done for their community. So recovering our own heritage, thinking with our own tongues and cultures. And another very important theme is this book on the critical theology out of the context of U.S. militarism in Asia, co-edited by Wong Hee, En Cho, and also Nama Kim. And so you have war, you have the experience of United States throughout Asia, the impact on Asian society and cultures. So already you can see connections between both sides of the Pacific. So it is not, we suddenly will be talking about Transpacific. There were already seeds sown in some of these inquiries. And of course, I just cite several books because a very important theme also came up that talks about trauma. Trauma-informed practical theology, how to talk about resilience, and racial healing. Of course, Dr. Angel Sung Park has been working on those themes for some time. So out of these decades of a conversation, we begin to discern a need to talk about something that has been added to the mix. What has been added to the mix? Obviously, we have to talk about the context of Transpacific theology. The first context is the economic development of East Asia and also, obviously, China. You can see here, you have the economic growth of the so-called four dragons. And then you have Singapore, you have Hong Kong, you have Taiwan, you have Korea. You can see the rather rapid growth. But this one is important. This one is about China. One talks about the economic growth in the last 10 years or so. And you can see there is a gap because the red one is China. The blue one, the United States. Can you see the gap? That is in terms of economic growth. And this one, oops, I took it from Paul Krugman's Substack. The Substack is entitled, China Has Overtaken United States. And what is that about? That is about electricity generation. We are competing in AI. AI needs a lot of electricity. to provide the source for the centers. And you can see China has 2 times the capacity to generate electricity. And that is why, according to Paul Krugman, if we do not do something, we cannot compete with China in terms of AI and also in terms of other technological advances. Now, this is important because this is the most current issue of The Economist. Did you read this magazine? This is the cover. What they are tipping is not the baseball. This is the world. Can you recognize this guy who looks like Yao Ming? This is China. And this is, I do not know who is this guy. But this is the cover. You have a lot of coverage in this issue about how, in certain aspects, China has overtaken United States and why they use this as the cover. So when I look at it, as someone of Chinese background who was born in the former British colony of Hong Kong, do you think that I should congratulate myself? Or I should wait a minute, is this real true? Or how this would affect my conceptualizing theology or teaching about theology? That is really a challenge, isn't it? And that is why I want to pose that challenge to all of us. So this is one of the contexts. And of course, it is also, just like Asian American theology was coming from the wave of the development of Asian American studies, Transpacific theology also came about because of the development of Transpacific studies. 2014, this book, co-edited by Jeanette Hoskins and Kwok Hyun, was very important because it then scouted what is the layout of the field, Transpacific studies. And the co-editors said, Transpacific studies provide an analytic that can be used to historicize, contextualize, and illuminate the Transpacific circulation of peoples, cultures, communities, and ideas. It is transnational, it's transregional, it's fluid, because you are talking about not only the circuit of capital, you are also talking about the circuit of people, goods, and resources. We never know. That little thing that is called rare earths will play such an important role in tomorrow's conversation. The circulation of rare earths as one of the commodity in this Trans-Pacific flow. And that is why, several years ago, recognizing the development of the kind of economic growth coming from the Asian countries and the development of Trans-Pacific studies, I and others began a research project to bring colleagues on both sides of the Pacific to talk about our theological imagination, our social analysis, and how we may respond to a changing situation. And I would like to define Transpacific theology as inviting us to disengage and disidentify with social and political imaginaries that are old, and to envision new possibilities and create meanings and practice to live into a more justice future. Why disengaged and disidentified? That is coming from the decolonial studies. Many of us are familiar with that concept, delinking. You have to delink yourself from that Eurocentric or imperial logics in order to see the world anew. Friends, the world has changed. This is 2025. The phenomenal growth of China must be reckoned with. You just look at the trade tariffs talk. Is the European countries playing a significant role? Who are the partners? Who are the competitors? Can you see the shift? And how come theological education remained in the 19th century? Catching up with the 20th. Never try to even take a step into the 20th. We waited for 25 years. And that is the challenge before us. And so, I want to share Transpacific theology did not begin from scratch, ex nihilo. No. It's built on the bodies of work coming from Asian theology, Asian American theology, and also Pacific theology. The emergence of political theology from a Transpacific lens signals a new awareness that these three bodies of theologies need to talk to each other. Especially, we need to learn from those who are in the Pacific. Because in our imaginary, we talk about the Pacific Rim. We talk about Asian Pacific. What about those islands in the Pacific? And we are fortunate to have our colleague, Hyun, who has published so many books written by himself and also edited by him that talks about the worldview, the Monar worldview, as comprising of the sky, the land, the sea, and the underworld. The sea is a very important category for their conceptualization. So it is not just the rim. You have the body of water. And from this body of water, how can we develop a blue theology? That is the challenge from our Pacific colleagues, from our Indonesian colleagues, and from others. And because of this conversation, we began our explorations. I call it explorations because it is really experimental. What are some of the themes that was talked about in this book, Trans-Pacific Political Theology? So I want to share with you some of the people and also what did they write about. We have John Pui-lan, who wrote Pacific Legacies of Racism and Casteism. We have Jonathan Tran, who explored racial capitalism's trans-Pacific impact. We have Dr. Casey Choi, who wrote about Asian American politics between empires. And we have another chapter that will be on US militarism and its impact in terms of climate and environmental crisis in both Asian and Pacific, written by Nami Kim. And then we have Trans-Pacific Feminist Theology, this chapter written by Kyungju Christine Pei, who also published a book on Trans-Pacific imagination of theology, ethics, and spiritual activism. Then we have queering theology from the context of Malaysia from Serempong, and from the Philippines, Michael Campus. Last but not the least, we have a whole session that talks about war, violence, and reparation. We have Saptami Nagawa from the Indonesia, and we have Grace Cow, a social ethicist from the United States. So we are probing what would be the terrain, the landscape, the topics that needs to be investigated. Now, having given this background, come the challenge. The first challenge is beyond the North Atlantic. It is not even Atlantic, not transatlantic, because it's always just the North. How much we learn about Brazil, for that matter, or how much we learn something about Africa. Maybe in some classes we do, but mostly it's European or Euro-American theology, or the curriculum is still shaped by that imaginary. I am not saying that is not important, but we needed another layer now, 2025, that is the Transpacific. So maybe it is good to do a curriculum audit to see, are we still doing theology, thinking the North Atlantic is the dominant part of the world, determining world politics? Or should we take into consideration this emerging new world order? It is difficult even to imagine what that curriculum would look like. Who is equipped to teach that? So that is the first challenge. The second challenge is a new social political imaginary. I think this is very difficult. When we look at China, or the rise of China, we said, what have we done? We helped China to develop economically, and thinking finally they will join the democratic world and they will be one of us. Lo and behold, China said, we did not sign up for that. We do not want to follow Western organization of society. Can we develop capitalism in another way? Anyone who will go to Shanghai will say, you say China as a communist society? It's even more capitalist than here. You go and look at it for yourself. And that is why the old imaginary, based on ideology, would not work. But remember, what about based on civilization? You have the clash of civilization, isn't it? Well, I submit to you, there might be other ways of looking at this new socio-political imaginary. Can I offer one? Inter-imperial. It's not just one empire, another empire. It's not China is catching up to be an empire. No, China always thinks of itself as the empire. The name says it. The name says Middle Kingdom. That is China. Remember in the traditional days? And then the other countries around, like vassals, needs to come to the Chinese court. China was the world's richest country before Europeans caught up. You have United States catching up with China. And of course, you have 100 years of humiliation. And today, from the Chinese point of view, it is the Chinese dream versus the make American great again. But 2025, the world is as it is. Because whether you call it collaboration or working together, that is the investment in money, the apples going to China, right, to be made, your iPhone. Look at how many things made in China. So it is a symbiotic process. So if today you say American imperialism is so overt in the last 8 months, and then you are talking about the threat or the rise of China as an important power, inter-imperial. And how are we going to deal with this inter-imperial as a new social imaginary? So, when we think about imagination for Transpacific theology, where are the sources? Who are the people that we need to consult? Can you think about some? Let me suggest. Begin with this guy, Carl Schmitt, 1922, published the book, Political Theology. I always argue political theology cannot start with him, too late. The Chinese, the Koreans, they fought against, you see, their oppressors, Western imperialism earlier than 1922. But there was a Carl Schmitt fever in China. Did you hear that? His work has been translated into Chinese, and people were consulting that. Very interesting development. Okay, so we look at Karl Barth, and of course at Princeton, you talk about Barth a lot. The Barmen Declaration, the courage to conceptualize a document like that for Germany at that time. So we talk about Dorothy Soller, who said, all theological statement should also be political statement, who then organized those light prayers in protest. A scholar, a theologian, and an activist. What about on the other side? So we begin with Reinhold Niebuhr. Reinhold Niebuhr spent a lot of time studying and changing his mind about socialism. He has even written about China, close to home. So we start with him. Professor Charles West, longtime faculty and dean. In 1958, he published a book, Communism and the Theologians. Anyone heard about that? Because he was a missionary in China. And then what about C.S. Song, who spent a lot of years in the United States teaching at Pacific School of Religion, who used narrative theology to talk about people's suffering, to talk about how this woman, he called it Lady Man, because her husband was conscripted to build China's Great Wall. Lady Man went to weep for the husband. And that was the beginning of the story of C.S. Song's critique of the power in China, the power that was ruling over Taiwan, and all the ruling ideologies. Just this story of Lady Man mourning for the death of her husband. But I asked myself, they were voices of their time. They make important contribution. Who are the theologians we need to listen? 2025. So we modify some of the offerings, elaborate, supplement, or change something. And that is why, finally, I want to talk about what kind of infrastructure. If you want to develop Transpacific theology, you cannot just have a small group alone. You need an infrastructure, right? Just like Asian American theology was built on a movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. The Transpacific theology was based on new awareness of the changing Asian situation and its relationship with North America. Infrastructure. First question, who should be doing Transpacific theology? Do you think that only the Asian Americans or the Pacific Islanders need to do it? That others will say, I cannot contribute. Are we responding to the signs of our time? The Association of Theological Schools have been pushing globalization of theological education for some time. Are they offering the infrastructure that will be needed to have this transnational, trans-regional conversation? Some of our theological schools have Asian or Asian American center. Would they be a place to talk about Transpacific theology? Or would their focus be mainly on the United States context? What kind of resources will be necessary to develop that? Princeton Theological Seminary has a lot of resources. Can it take the lead to help churches, seminaries to dream ahead? Develop a theology that responds to the changing situation. Tomorrow, after President Xi and President Trump met, that we have something to tell the student, that we have something to help them so they can go to their churches to explain how this new situation is unfolding. Anyone who is just busy looking back to the 19th century missed the urgent signs of the time. As theologians, unless we remember the theologian said, one side of the Bible, one side, the Economist or the newspaper, they said like this, we are still thinking about 19th century. Wake up! The challenge is before us. Have something to say. Respond to God's calling. So I want to conclude by citing the end of my introduction. Transpacific theology bears witness to the traumatic experiences of war, violence, militarism, racism, casteism, and gender and sexual injustice in the formation of nationhood and peoplehood, as well as to the resilience and triumph of the human spirit. Transpacific theology contributes hope to unravel the logic of empire, expose the underside of politics, and shine a spotlight on the marginalized and those who remained unaccounted for. That is the challenge of Transpacific theology for all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for questions for Dr. Kwok. And so we would just ask if you would, we're going to pass around the microphone. I ask if you could pass around the microphone for me. If you would just please state your name, introduce yourself, and then ask your question. So state your name and then ask your question. Ask your question so that we can get as many people as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue-Ann Shaw, and I'm a master's student here. And my question is, what is the outcome that you hope the scholarship would have? What's the impact that you want to see Transpacific political theology having on the world or on the church, or, et cetera? What are like the practical end goals of the work? Yeah.
Yes, I think the goal is to bring a better world for everybody. We are talking about the end of this month. The people who are on SNAP will not receive their check. As easy as talking about this, that is a very concrete example. We have on our campus a conference on food and faith. Let us not look at outside, let us look at ourselves. We have people who are hungry. We have children who are hungry in the United States. Transpacific theology against inter-imperial logic and try to bring a better world, not only for human beings, but for planet Earth, so that not only we can survive, we have something to bequeath for our children and their children. This is a collective dream, isn't it? Thank you.
Xinjun Chang, Director of OMSC. You have your foot on so many different fields, and world Christianity is one of them. So you know how infamous world Christianity is of not having conversation with other fields. And one of the fields that they're not having conversation with is ethnic studies, Asian American studies, African. So that I'm trying to remedy that and invite Latin Americans and Latinos and Latinas next year as a resident scholar. So I'm trying to bridge the gap between the diaspora communities and our folks in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So my question is, how can we motivate our colleagues who are in ethnic studies and who are in world Christianity or who are in Asian theology to talk to each other and to utilize each other's materials and to come up with a Trans-Pacific or transatlantic theology that doesn't just address regionally but transnationally? So I've been just wrestling with that with you, so I just wanted to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much. As you can see, academia is set up in a very interesting way. There are different expertise and discipline. There is this commodification of knowledge. I have my own somewhere to sell. Oh, John knows Aquinas, right? Over the dinner, we heard Aquinas. Someone, maybe Reinhold Niebuhr, or someone knows about the Bible. Okay? This is proprietary. Don't mess up with me. I only know this, okay? You like Aquinas? I don't know, And that is why theological education used to be like that. Do you know that the theologians sometimes do not want to talk about the Bible? Because the Bible, people say, you don't understand the Bible. We said, you don't know how to interpret it. You only know history. So we then compartmentalized. And in our world, it's so complex. We all talk about interdisciplinary. But the difficulty is, we spend a lifetime just know our own discipline. How can we have spare time or the luxury of learning what other fields are saying or developing? And that is why trans is beyond, it's change, possibilities. And I hope we will have more conversations because the task before us is so complex, isn't it? Nobody has the crystal ball to know all. And that is why we rely on each other's expertise, your wisdom and your longings and your passions. And together, hopefully, with humility, we have something to offer. On Friday, after the two presidents met,
Thanks so much. Hyun Bahit, good to see you. My question is whether there is a trans-religious aspect to this Transpacific theology. Because the task is daunting, the one that you put before us, and I wonder if it's for Christians only, or how do we frame this theology beyond Christianity?
Thank you very much. And Transpacific theology, of course, is not just for Christians, because in some Asian countries, Christians are tiny minority. I'm talking about Japan, I'm talking about Thailand. So this living theology should be for all, not just for Christians. And I hope we are not doing interreligious dialogue in the old days, because interreligious dialogue can be conflict management, to cite the work of Atalia Omar, that we need to depoliticize, decolonial interreligious dialogue, and to understand the political context of interreligious dialogue. And in many countries, obviously in Gaza and in South Asia and some part of Southeast Asia, Myanmar, for example, you have these ethnic conflicts fueled by religion and, of course, by economic disparity too. So I hope this Transpacific theology will have very porous boundary. It is not, this is Transpacific. It is always listening to the voices unaccounted for. Did you hear what I just read? The voices unaccounted for yet. And I think that is really the prophetic imagination or the vocation of those of us studying in seminary today. One last question.
Yeah, my name is Seung Kim, PhD student here. I believe we are experiencing unprecedented transformations in the world these days. So technological advancements like AI and long-term US Treasury ETF is no longer selling fast. Also, the age when the dollar was considered the world's reserve currency is also under threat these days. However, I think these global issues are not well reflected in theology, as you said. So while the world and Christianity are fundamentally different, I sometimes think, as you said, the Economist and other theological journals are presenting the same world in different ways. So from this perspective, I'm deeply intrigued by the perspective on economic aspects in your book. So how are these approaches being explored in more diverse ways in theology? So through what channels can we hear the voices of such experts?
Thank you very much. And that obviously is a very complex question. But I want to pick up one thing about AI. Because when we talk about Transpacific theology, this needs to be a very important category, because that will also influence economics. And why the stocks keep going up is because of AI, both here in the United States and also in China. From many years ago, 1998, I wrote an essay, What if God's name is 010010 binary system? And if you want, I have the Substack, I have that Substack, because I was trying to understand what is the digital imagination talking about God. I even Google, maybe at that time not Google, maybe you have the Yahoo, whatever, to try to find God. How many times it appeared? Around 1998, to my utter surprise, 8,000 something. Can you believe it? Today, go home, just Google God to see how many, Google search. What I'm saying is, then, some years ago, I was invited to go to Virginia Tech to join a conversation on AI and its challenges to religion, to humanities. And I began to pay attention to how the Chinese scholars are talking about AI and ethics. Oh my gosh, a lot of articles that talk about that topic. And then together with Tracy Trojan and Bong Yong Lee, we co-wrote an essay talking about AI from an East Asian philosophical and religious perspective. This is available on the web. And then we begin to do a cross-cultural philosophical study of how those coming from Asia may look at AI and its development in a different way. Because for some of the Chinese, the question, are we praying God, is not even a question. They don't believe in God. Can you see? The whole paradigm change. If you use Taoism or Buddhism to look at AI, you may end up looking at it differently. And so, as we are thinking about Transpacific theology, I want to evoke Edward Said, contrapuntal, counterpoint. They are counterpoints to many things. You don't need to have one and Western, Chinese, or Korean. You need to establish a lot of those counterpoints to build up a matrix of understanding the complex world and to come up with a really profound theological imagination that can address the situation of our time. And that is why our generation is passing the baton to you, students. You are the futures of this new world that some of us may not have the privilege of living into. But we hope you begin in that endeavor, taking one little step. Tell yourself, I am doing theology for 2025. And challenge your professor so that they can also take a bigger step, 2025. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Show your love, Dr. Kwok, Pui-lan.
Thank you.
Go introduce yourself to somebody. Oh, I'm good.